Tonight we're going to be doing Kashrut part number 3. This is a very difficult part. There are quite a few details, as I mentioned in the introduction, of the area that we call the Sarve Halal. This part is an important part because it deals with how to manage one's kitchen, what to do if something goes wrong, how to identify if something is wrong, when do you consult with a rabbi. Because there are numerous examples, quite a few details, I felt it was best to go through the most important concepts that one can run into when he learns these halachot, and some of which will be applicable also to Hilchot Shabbat. So it's a good time to perhaps familiarize ourselves with some of these important concepts. And by understanding them, we will have an easier time in dealing with these halachot of Basar v'Halal, especially the details. So let's begin with explaining the various types of kelim. Since we're dealing with heat, and heat is one of the factors that could be a source of trouble, we need to understand that there's various types of heat, various levels of heat, and it's very important to know what each one is, what each level of heat represents, and what it can do. Keli Rishon, loosely translated, means the first vessel. It's the one that's sitting on top of the stove, on top of the fire, boiling. But it could also be called Keli Rishon if that was the pot that was sitting on top of the flame, but it has been removed. But it's still the original Keli, and it's still called Keli Rishon. Obviously there is some difference between if something is sitting on the fire, or if it's removed from the fire, but for what we need to know today, they're both the same, they're both called Keli Rishon. Keli Sheni is Keli number 2, which would mean that what was in the first pot was poured into a second pot. Let's say you have soup. That would be an example of Keli Rishon. A pot of soup on top of the stove, and you pour it into plates. You serve. So the plate is called a Keli Sheni. You have a percolator that's connected to the wall. That's a Keli Rishon. It's connected to the source of fire, electricity. You pour the contents into a cup. The cup becomes a Keli Sheni. In between the Keli Rishon and Keli Sheni, there's a level called Irui, pouring. Because the stream of water that's coming down, and you see that in the percolator, would be called Irui. That is a little bit different, and I'll tell you what the differences are in a moment. Then you have Keli Shlishi. Somehow you took the contents in the second bowl, and you put it into a third bowl. When would that happen? Let's say you take the pot, you pour it into a big bowl, and that's what you serve at the table. You're not going to take the pot from the fire to the dinner table. You may pour it into some other Keli, that would be Keli Sheni. So the plates eventually will be Keli Shlishi. So what do we call the actual spatula that you are removing the contents from the pot? No, but it all depends where you're removing it. If you are removing the contents from the Keli Rishon, the spatula continues to be a Keli Rishon. Okay? Because you did not actually pour it into another pot, you are taking it out of the pot while it's on especially if it's on the flame. So it's almost a continuation of the Keli Rishon. It's not really a separate Keli. Even though some may consider it a separate Keli, but we're a little bit strict on that. So that gives you an idea of what all these three are. Why is it important for us to know? Because obviously the levels of heat are different. Keli Rishon is the most powerful. It's the hottest. Keli Sheni is less hot. Keli Shlishi is even less hot. And this is important, as I said before, in Hilchot Shabbat and in Hilchot Basar v'Halal, in case you need to know if there was a mixture of milk and meat, at what level do they mix? I think I mentioned last week that if everything is cold, for the most part, we don't have any problem. The problems arise when one or the two of them are hot. Keli Sheni, according to most opinions, eno mevasher. It does not have the same power as Keli Rishon. It does not even have therefore does not have the power to cook. Some say it has the power to absorb, nevertheless, in itself, but not necessarily to cook something else. So this will make a difference, because if our problems involve a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, and the like, we're dealing with a problem on level number 2, Keli Sheni, not a problem on level number 1. So when we get a problem, I'm going to mention that later, somebody mixed his coffee by mistake with this meat spoon. Oh, okay, that's a problem. It's meat and milk. Yes, it is a problem, but let's try to figure this one out, if you can, if it's simple, and see what we're dealing with. Many times it will not be simple, and I urge you, of course, to consult a rabbi and not take it upon yourself, because Yisur Basar v'Halal is a serious Yisur, the mixture of the two. A kitchen is deemed to be a kosher kitchen where you can comfortably and confidently eat in that kitchen, if it's somebody else's kitchen, if you know that they are aware of Ilchot Basar V'Chalav, aside from the fact that you're hopefully aware that they don't buy non-kosher food and bring it into the house. So kosher kitchen involves making sure, this is not only for yourself, but in case you're invited somewhere, do they eat anything that's not kosher in that kitchen, those pots and pans? And are they careful with Basar V'Chalav? Then there are other issues too, which we'll get to. The issues of tola'im, they may be perfectly good food. Vegetables, what's wrong with that? There may be additional problems. All of this is important in order for you to determine, can you eat at this person's home or not? Should you have any concern? So that is why these three kalim would make a difference, and we want to know what the level of heat is. The second concept is tata gavar. I just translated very quickly before I came. It may not be the exact translation, but tata'a gavar is an Aramaic expression which means the bottom one wins. The bottom one is the more powerful one. For example, okay, let's say you have a hot piece of meat on your plate, and by accident, a little bit of milk fell on the piece of meat, but the meat is boiling hot. Would that make any difference if it was the other way around, that the hot one was the one that fell and the bottom one was cold? Yes, the rabbis tell us it makes a big difference. The bottom one is always powerful. It always wins. And if the bottom one is the hot one, in this case, if the bottom one is the meat, and the milk is cold, then they both may become asur. Of course, depending on how hot they are and so forth. They're both hot for sure, there's no question. The bottom one, therefore, will become asur, and the one that fell onto it will become asur. This is also important in the Chod Shabbat. To give you an example, let's say you're drinking a cup of tea, and after 10 minutes, you're reading a book, your cup of tea is cold, or cooled off. Can you add hot water to that cup of tea, to the water? You may be boiling it. You may be boiling the water, depending on how hot the water is coming down. You may be boiling the water that's the leftovers in your cup of tea. Now, this is not as simple as it sounds. Obviously, there's quite a few halachot that I need to discuss in order to explain what the problem is. If the water has already been cooked, what's the problem? But we'll get to that. I don't want to mix it Chod Shabbat, but I'm just giving you an example of that if the bottom one contains a lot of cold water, and all you're adding is a little bit of hot water, then the cold water that's sitting at the bottom is more powerful, and the hot water that's coming down cannot cook the cold water. But if you have very little cold water at the bottom, then even though it's at the bottom, it may be a problem. So the one that's sitting in the bottom is always more powerful. So if the piece of meat fell into a bowl of milk, cereal, somehow the piece of meat that was hot fell into a bowl of cereal. So what was at the bottom? Milk, right? In that case, the meat will not be entirely prohibited. All you would have to do is remove a little bit, a klipa, which we'll get to a little bit later, a little small layer on top, because that fall, that immersion from the top to the bottom, and the bottom one being cold in this case, is not as powerful, because the hot was on top instead of being at the bottom. The one that's always at the bottom is the one that's more powerful. In this case, the bottom one is milk, it's cold. It will overpower, and it will not necessarily allow the meat to absorb all that milk. Whereas if the meat was at the bottom and it was very, very hot, then it's able to absorb and to release its flavors into the milk and into itself. So that's the idea of tata'ar gavar, and we need to just be aware of this. In case it happens, it makes a difference which one was at the bottom. Next one is Yad Soledet Bo. Most people here, I think, are more familiar, more comfortable with Celsius, not with Fahrenheit. Which one? Fahrenheit? Celsius. So I'll tell you both. Yad Soledet Bo is an expression, means that the hand resists. It's so hot that as soon as you touch it, you do this. Or as some say, you put it into your mouth and you can't take it. You can't put it into your mouth. It's hot enough. It's not boiling hot, but it's hot enough. Shayat Soledet Bo. Your hand resists. You touch it and you immediately remove your hand. How hot is that? 180 degrees. How do you know it's 180? You measured it? There's different opinions and there's a range. But I think the average is 45 degrees Celsius, or approximately 113 degrees. Yeah, that is enough for some people to do this. Now, for you and me, we might need 145. We may be able to tolerate a little bit more. We have to take the average. Some people are more sensitive. So 113 may be sufficient for a person to think twice before he puts his hand in. Why is this important? Because we need to know the level, as I said before, of the heat. of how hot was it. Because some claim that it's much more important to know if something is yad soledetbo or if something was a kli sheni, for example. Because if it's a kli sheni but it's still yad soledetbo, it's a hot kli sheni, the soup is very, very hot. So what if it's a kli sheni? But it's yad soledetbo. It may make a difference. Where would it make a difference? I mean, in Shabbat it also makes a difference. Can you add spices? Can you add after the soup is served? No, you can't. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbat, right? But most opinions hold that a kli sheni does not cook. But there are certain things that will easily cook even in a kli sheni. Even in a kli sheni, some things cook very easily. They don't need a lot of heat. So we need to determine, well, how hot is that kli sheni? So yad soledetbo is a very important term that you will see in Chot Shabbat, or Basar v'Chalad, and in other areas. How hot was it? So this is another way of determining. One way is whether it's a kli rishon, kli sheni, or kli shlishi. The fact that it's in the second and third vessel, it cools down just by the fact you're transferring it from one to the other. But you can test it yourself to see how hot it is. And this will help us determine what do we do with a certain mixture. Next point, tam ke'ikar. Tam ke'ikar is a very important concept in Yilchot Basar v'Chalav and Taruvot, and it means that the flavor of something is like the real McCoy, I could say in English. The real McCoy is the hatikat nevilah, hatikat isur, something which is prohibited to eat. Let's say somebody by mistake, the maid, she wanted to contribute to dinner, and she brought her own hot dogs, and she puts it all together. And you can recognize her hot dogs, okay, so you remove it, of course, but there's flavor. Is the flavor a problem? Of course it's a problem. The ta'am, the flavor of something which is asur, is just like the isur. Almost, there's some differences, but it still needs to be dealt with. The flavor needs to be dealt with. Basar v'Chalav is unique because each one, the basar is permissible, the halab is permissible, the water, each one by themselves is okay. The problem is when they mix together, then you have a problem. So we'll talk a little bit about it more later on, and how that is relevant, the tam ke'ikar. Since we're speaking about flavors, there's a concept called tam nifgam. That's also an important concept in this halachot. There is a flavor, and there is a flavor. Some flavors, after a while, they lose their intensity. They lose their flavor. It becomes a tam pagum, a defective flavor. And that, the rabbis say, happens after 24 hours. If a day has passed, any flavor that is left in the pots or pans is a tam pagum. This is perhaps one of the most important concepts you need to know in the Yilchot Basar v'Chalav. This makes a world of a difference. Why? Because if by mistake, after you prepared your roast for the Chag, for the holiday, you realize that you prepared it in a dairy pot, one of the first things a rabbi will ask you or remind you would be, did you use that pot today or not? Because if you did not use it for several days, any flavor of the dairy in those pots and pans is a tam pagum. Why do I need to know that? Well, you need to know if you can serve that, you can have that roast, you can eat it. So the tam pagum is something very important to remember because you come across it in many areas of Basar v'Chalav. Yeah, we're going to talk about that soon, about the various materials. Yes. Alright, the next concept is bitul b'shishim. Alright, since flavor is important, does it always remain important? Is it always a problem? No, sometimes it could go away, it could disappear somewhat. If it's tam pagum, as we said, or if it's batel, if it's lost, if it's annulled. There's 60 times as much, right? It's dissipated light. This is important in another area of Hilchot Ta'aruvot that I'll speak about maybe next week. We need to know when we buy a product, okay? You look at a product, all the ingredients look right except for one. One you know is not kosher. Yes? No, it has no OU, of course. It has no supervision. And you want to know if you can still eat it. Let's say you are very familiar with all the ingredients, you're a chemist. You're just familiar. And you see an ingredient that you know for sure is not kosher. However, you see a percentage next to it. It says 2%. So, is it batel or not? 2%. So how much do you have against it? What? You don't have 60 against it, right? So it's not batel. What if you have only 1%? Then it's batel. Could you eat it? What if that ingredient is carmine or papilio, which is made from cockroaches? Would you still eat it, even if it's 1%? Right? Disgusting. So what if it's 1%? What? What's confusing? There's a concept called batel b'shishim. If you have 60 times as much of the power against it, right? You have milk falling into a pot. You want to know, and I'll talk about that soon. You want to know if you can eat that meat, and you want to rely on bitul. Even though tam is a problem, there's flavor, but there's something called bitul that can eliminate, can dissipate, like you said, the whole flavor. So it all depends on the amount. So you need, for flavor, you need 60. Okay, we're going to talk about what later, maybe next week, what happens if it's not liquids, if it's solids. You have one non-kosher hot dog that got mixed with 4 or 5 other kosher hot dogs. What do you do then? You don't have 60, and you don't need 60, by the way. That's a different area, different concept, different halachot. Yes?
So you said that the price is 2 cents and not 90.
It's 40. Yeah, maybe you can explain it. I have a hard time explaining this concept. Yeah. Yeah. Why? Because that is what the rabbis figured is sufficient to dissipate the flavor. Some flavors would dissipate things less with that, and I'm going to talk about that soon. But with 60, it's usually gone. Right? Yeah, if a fly or something falls into it, you just remove it.
Boiling water, boiling soup.
Right. Right. If you don't mind, some people will, if a fly falls into a bowl of soup, they'll just throw the whole thing away. Some people will remove the fly and eat the soup, and some people will eat the fly with the soup. They do that in China. Yeah. Okay. No, so did you understand the concept of 2%?
Like they taste-form taste.
Right.
One teaspoon of milk.
Right. Right.
But then
right. Yeah, batel b'shishim means that there's 60 parts, okay? 60 parts in the contents of that food against what's shelled into it. 60 times as much, right? So you have 61 ounces versus 1 ounce.
So how do they put something part of what it says?
So in percent, if you have 2%, you don't have enough parts against the 2%. Right? You following? In other words, it's huh?
120. Yeah.
Exactly. So you need 120. Right.
No, say something is part of it,
right?
And it'll say OUD.
Okay.
So how do you get part out of OUD?
It wouldn't say parva if it's OUD.
The label.
What you may have seen is something else. It says parva, but it says it says OU DE, dairy equipment. Yeah, which is not as big as a problem.
But it's still.
But if it's parva, it's parva. It can't be D. But dairy equipment is not a problem. It means something else. All right. So does everybody understand the concept of bitul? It exists. It can dissipate the flavor. The flavor is gone. Now, if you're a Sephardi and you want to know if you could eat something, let's say some hamim, some milk fell into it. You don't know 60, 50. You don't have time to measure. You don't have to measure. You can have a goy taste. That's called ta'imat kapila. If you can ask a chef, a goy, who happens to be around, who has the ability to taste, can you please taste this for me? Tell me if you can feel any milk. If there's no milk in there, you can have it, even if there's no 60. So the Sephardim rely on having a goy taste it. You want to know, can you eat it or not? Some milk fell into it? Have a goy tell you if you taste any milk. If he's able to taste the milk, then of course it's a sur. If he's not, then it's fine. But there's an exception to that. So before I tell you about the exception, Ashkenazim don't use this. We don't rely on it. There are very few things that we rely on them. And that's for Pasal Haladida. We need 60. So you need to determine, you have to calculate how much was in the pot. If it's just a drop of milk, there's a good chance you have 60 against it. But if you had a whole half a cup of milk fall into it, that may be a big problem. So imagine you're cooking for 45 people. This could make a big difference. Erev Shabbat. What do I do? Start all over? I don't have any time. So the decisions have to be made if the product of what you just cooked is taref or not, depending on how much fell in. Yeah.
Why the magic goes number 6?
That is what the rabbis calculate. figure that with 60 amounts, that whatever flavor was there is dissipated. That's what they say. That's what it takes. It just takes 60 amounts. Well, it's just a fact of nature. That's 60. Let's say you have a drop of milk in water. You have 60 amounts of water again. You won't recognize the milk. You won't even taste it. The flavor that was there just disappeared. And there is flavor, but you won't be able to tell anymore. There's so much against it that the molecules are completely separated. Yeah.
Well, number 60 also known for the fact that you always said dream 160th prophecy, so 60 must have a special significance. Number 60.
Well, it's a way of measuring. You could say 1 of 100 too.
Rabbis have said clearly the dream is 160th prophecy.
Meaning that it's more than 1 of 100.
Right.
So they use 60 as a way of describing something that they can understand.
They break up the minute, the hour by 60.
Right, the minute and hour broken up by 60.
There must be something.
It could be something more. Yeah. But that is the amount that is required to dissipate the flavor. So if you're a Sephardi, you can use that. There's an exception to this, and that is, for example, if you had a piece of meat falling into the bowl of milk. If you remove that piece of meat right away, there's no problem. You just ask if you're Sephardi, somebody to taste it for you. The problem is that once the meat stays there for a while, and it's cooking, it's boiling, the milk that entered, that was absorbed into the meat, is later extracted back into the pot. And that's a mixture already of basar and halab together. It's no longer just flavor of meat. Now it's the flavor of basar and halab, which is a sur, going in. Then you cannot even use a kapela to tell you. Then you have to rely on 60. You have no choice. So once you have a real isur, you need 60 to cancel it out. If all it is a flavor of something that was mutar, milk is mutar by itself. Meat by itself mutar. According to some opinions, you can use a kapela. But anyway, whoever is Ashkenaz always needs to figure out how much is in the pot in order to know if the flavor is dissipated. Next concept, ze'ah v're'ah. We talked about flavor. Flavor is important. Flavor makes a difference. But what about the steam or the vapor of something? This is an important point because we'll be talking very soon about how to bake in an oven milk and meat. Okay, so we need to be concerned about what? About the ze'ah and the re'ah, perhaps. Is that a problem? Ze'ah is much more of a problem than re'ah. The rabbis tell us, re'ah lav miltari. You don't have to be concerned with the smell. So much so that even if you had a big oven, and you had something taref, baked in the same oven, and something kasher, if all that was involved was a smell, the di'abad, it's okay. Nothing happened. The di'abad smell does not make your food, your kosher food, taref. If all was involved is smell. Okay? The problem with certain processes, for example, smoking, it is much more than just smell. There's a flavor, there's a steam, it's a form of cooking. Right? It's the vapor. So vapor is much more of a problem than re'ah. So the term ze'ah is significant because you come across it either in an oven or, as we will see, in a microwave, which is another thing we'll talk about. How or can you use a microwave for both basar and halab? How to do it all. So what do we have a concern with? All we have the concern with in those areas is mostly ze'ah. Because the two are separate, the two are not touching. So what problem can there be? The problem in ovens and microwaves is the ze'ah. Another concept is ben yomo, which we briefly touched upon before. You want to know if a kli was used on that day or not. If a keli was used, if a vessel was used on that day, it's called ben yomo. If it's not, it's an ena ben yomo. What if you don't know? When was the last time you used it? Let's say you come to your friend's house, he's gone to Israel, and he lets you use his home. Right? And you came to the same day he left. Maybe he used it that morning to make some eggs for breakfast. So Ramas gave us a klal, stam kelim, inan b'nei yuman. Stam. For the most part, in general, kelim are not b'nei yuman. You take something out of the drawer, it was most likely not used that day. You can assume that. You don't know. So this is very, very important. The whole idea of something is b'nei yuman or not, that can make a tremendous difference, as we will see when we talk about the actual examples of what can go wrong. This is an important factor. This and the other one that we spoke about, bitul b'shishim. In case it is a problem, we need to know if we can rely on the bitul or not. The other area that was important is, of course, the level of heat. What is that? With the levels of heat? No, levels of heat is just to give us an idea of how hot it was. you can determine that something was not yet solid. Or it was in a kli sheni, second vessel, it's less of a problem. Right? So even though you don't have 60 parts against the that. Yeah. What you need to. Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to the examples of Benyamin and Eno in a moment. The next concept is Chaticha Na'aset Nevilah, which is what we see in Basar v'Halal. Each one by itself is mutar. The problem is when you mix the two together, the meat that has absorbed milk becomes like a nevilah, and it's a big problem. If a piece of meat, which is this big, few inches in length, right, becomes a nevilah as a result of having absorbed the milk, if that piece of meat now falls into another pot, you don't need 60 anymore against the original milk. Now you need 60 against this whole piece of meat. Because a piece of meat that becomes asur because of the milk, and now it falls in another piece of another pot, now you need to calculate, do I have 60 against this entire piece? That may be more difficult. Chatichat na'aset nevilah. The whole chaticha, the whole piece has become like a nevilah. As though this would be a nevilah. In other words, like meat which is not kosher. You need to calculate against the entire piece. There's a big machloket in this area of chatichat na'aset nevilah, if this applies also to other isurim, or just to basar v'chalav. Going to the Bet Yosef, going to the Sfaradim, only in basar v'chalav you say this, not in other isurim. Ashkenazim follow the opinion that this may apply also to other isurim. You may need to calculate against the entire thing. If something has absorbed an isur, even some other type of an isur. Yes. The concept of Chaticha Na'aset Nevilah, you have, let's say you have a drop of milk, or a couple drops of milk falling into a pot of meat. We spoke about it before that you will need to calculate. Right? We're dealing with a kli rishon, so that's a problem. It's hot. Now we know you can in any way still eat it. The only place where we can get help from is the concept of bitul. So if there's 60 times, fine. So you can easily figure out, hopefully, if there's 60 times against the drops. Right? Now, let's look at the other way around. Instead of drops falling into the meat, you have a piece of meat falling into the milk. Okay? It's the same thing. This time now you have to calculate if there is enough in the milk, in the liquid, against the piece of meat, right? Following? You need 60 times against whatever fell in to make the milk, or whatever is in the pot, mutar. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens to the actual item that falls inside. What happens to it? Does that become kosher too? That's another issue. Alright? Now, in Chatichat Na'aset Nevilah, what is happening is, which is very unique to basar v'chalav, a piece of meat has fallen into milk. It did not become batel because there was not enough in the milk to cancel the meat. It was just a little bit of milk, right? So what happened to the meat? The meat became asur, right? There's no bitul. You can't eat this meat now. This meat now has milk absorbed into it by the cooking process. Hot. You have to throw it away. But before you realize that, before you had time to throw it away, that piece of meat which now contains milk fell into another pot. I don't know, either intentionally or unintentionally. So, let me recook it again. Leftovers, right? That could happen. So somehow it got involved in another pot. Say, oh no, this piece of meat was asur. It has basar v'chalav. Now you need to calculate again. What do you calculate in this new pot of meat? It's not a new pot of milk, but a new pot of meat. Do you have to calculate against the original milk that was absorbed into that meat? No, not anymore. You have to calculate against the entire piece of meat now. Because now that piece of meat is asur with basar and halal. So the whole thing becomes a nevilah. Because even though this piece of meat now is falling into another pot of meat and meat. Yes, but this meat is a nevilah now. This piece of meat has milk in it. And once this piece of meat has milk, it becomes a true basar v'chalav mixture, which makes it a nevilah. Because it becomes a nevilah, when you calculate the second pot, you cannot no longer calculate against the original drops of milk that may have been absorbed. Now it's the whole piece of meat that you have to calculate against. Now, of course, we're assuming you know how to calculate how much milk can be absorbed into a piece of meat, which it requires some expertise too. But so we're not getting into that right now, because that requires a little bit of expertise. But let's say you know it's not enough to calculate against the milk. Because you're concerned about milk. No, now you're not concerned about milk. Now you're concerned about the entire piece. Because that entire piece is like a nevelah. It's like a piece of non-kosher meat. You need to calculate against all of it, even if it's this big. Regardless, it's a nevelah, yes.
If it's a piece of chicken that's not, it's serious. If chicken is not meat.
Right, chicken is midrabanan asur. It's by rabbinic decree prohibited, not midoraita. So there would be less problems with it. You would be able to benefit. You could sell it and give it away. You wouldn't be able to eat it. No, we don't eat chicken with milk. No. By rabbinic decree.
But if you're taking it out,
The same is true if it was deer meat, by the way. Hayat, the only midrabanan is prohibited. Lot Rashan Bil B'Halel is only concerning kosher domesticated animals. But by rabbinic decree, by rabbinic extension, because they resemble, they also forbade hayot and afot, wild animals. The next concept is em mevatli isur lechatchila. All right, you realize I only have 30 or 40 or 50 against the whatever milk fell in. Let me add some more water. Let me add some more potatoes, and it will be 60 or more, right? Usually you can't do this. There are some instances where the rabbis permitted this. You cannot do that. That is a big question when we talk about ingredients in the marketplace. You go out to buy potato chips, okay? Let's say you want to buy some potato chips. And you know that 1% in the potato chip is not kosher, okay? And you're not concerned about the ingredient because it's not from cockroaches or bugs. The problem though is, are the companies allowed for you? Are they allowed to be mevatel? Because by them putting the ingredient intentionally, initially there, it's like they're saying, we're going to make it vatel for you. You see what I mean? That is an issue that is discussed by rabbis and those organizations that are responsible for giving supervision. This comes up. Do we allow this practice or not? Or since it's commercialized, they're not really doing it for you. They're just doing it for the marketplace. Because you can't have somebody be mevatel for you. You cannot do it yourself. You cannot have somebody else do it for you. But because the companies are doing it for the market, not for anybody specific, is it mutar or asur? That is an issue that the rabbis discussed. I just wanted you to be familiar with this issue. That it's there, it's only 1%, it's batel, but perhaps it's not good. And the OU or good organization will not give a good supervision for it because they did it there in the beginning. If it's fell in by accident, so we can rely on bitul b'shishim, right? If you're Sephardi, you can use somebody to taste it, depending on the problem or what happened exactly, what the mixture was. But what if they did it intentionally? Or you have this problem, can you go ahead and add? No, you can't add. So if you see that the pot is too small, and there's no way that the pot contains enough to cancel, to dilute, to take the flavor, you can't just go ahead and add more water. I'm going to cancel it. Yes, of course, what you're going to end up doing is canceling, but you cannot do that in the Chatzilah. Yeah. So it's a surah. Okay, real quickly, let's go to Libun and Hagalah. There are various methods of koshering pots. We'll be talking about that towards the very, very end of this series of Kashrut. That is what happens if a pot does become not kosher as a result of mixture of milk and meat. How do you make it kosher again? There's various methods depending on how the pot or how the utensil was used. One method is called Libun, which involves flame or fire. One involves Hagalah, which is boiling water. And the third method, which is the easiest one, is just hadahat, just washing it off. There's actually a fourth method that is used sometimes, especially for Pesach. That is by the Ashkenazim use that method, and I'll tell you when we get to it. And that's changing the water, putting something in water for 24 hours, taking out the water, putting it again into 24 hours, 3 times. So we'll talk about that. So these are the various methods. The most common one that you will come across with is Libun and Hagalah. You need to know this whether you had a problem in your kitchen, or somehow, not ideally, a goy sold you his pots and pans. And they're taref, of course, right? You want to make them kasher. How do you go about making those kasher? Now, of course, I don't recommend that. Go to Kmart and buy yourself a new set. If you don't want to get involved in it. Taref, right? But you need to be familiar with these ideas of how do you, just in case. Where would you want to do this? You're in a hotel. You're staying there for a week. You want to use the stove. You want to use the oven. You want to use the microwave. Can you use it? Is there any way to do it? After all, don't they warm your food up in the plane in a microwave, which is not kosher? How is it possible? So we're going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about how to kosher a kitchen, with various methods. But this is important because in case it does happen at the kitchen, some problem arises with the mixtures of basar and halav, this may be necessary to do for the pots and pans. You cannot continue to use them. And in a few minutes, I'm going to give you the most typical examples or problems that occur, and a little bit what you can do about it. I'm not going to get into all the details. There's so many possibilities, and it's not possible to cover all of them, but I'm going to give you the basics. All right. Since we're speaking about Libud and Agala, just be aware that there's various types of vessels. There is metal, there is glass, plastic, stoneware, porcelain, bone, wood, Pyrex. Did I miss anything? Teflon, all these, yeah. So with Zat Hashem, when we talk about Libud and Agala and how to make a kosher kitchen, I'm going to give you a list of all the various materials that are most common in the market and how each one can be handled with. This may not happen too often, except for Pesach. Pesach too. Today, Baruch Hashem, most people have a separate set of dishes for Pesach. But in case you need a pot, or you don't have enough pots, and you want to use a pot or pan for Pesach, you have to go through similar steps to make that pot good for Pesach use. So this will help us also with Pesach as well. These area of halachot that concerns the various types of vessels and the various methods of making something kosher. Another area that is significant is the area of machalim, harifim, spicy food, or not necessarily spicy food, but something which is very hot, like onions. They're in a somewhat of a class on their own when it comes to basar v'halav. And the typical example that you need to be aware of is that if you cut an onion with a meat knife, and now you want to make shakshuka with cheese, so that onion has retained the flavor of this meat knife. Okay, even though there's no cooking involved, there's no boiling water involved. What you have here is a combination of two things, actually. Sakin and ma'achal harif. Each one by themselves is in its own class. That even though there's no boiling water involved, the fact that you're dealing with a knife is important. The fact that you're dealing with spicy food or an onion is important. So in case you want to use that onion for milk, you would need to remove a piece, like one layer of it. Not the whole onion is a soup to use in milk, but the outer, where you have to remove a layer. Which brings us to the next concept of kedei netila and kedei klipa. You see this in Basar V'Chalav, this concept of how much you need to remove. Either something becomes completely asur, it's called kulo asur, you have to throw it away. Or you can just remove kedei klipa. Klipa is a small superficial layer, or kedei netila, a little bit more. This is also common. You go to a fish market. Goyim are using their knives to cut the fish. You know it's a kosher fish. You see the scales. But he's using the same knife that he's used for lobster, shrimps, and crabs. Even if it's cold, it's a knife. Very good point. Even if it's cold, even though there's no hot water involved, nevertheless, there's some flavor that is transmitted from the sharpness of the knife to the food that you're cutting. However, since it's cold, the only amount that is transferred is kedei klipa maybe, or kedei netila, depending on what's involved. So all you would have to do is cut the edges of where he cut. Some say even that you don't have to do, because fish is not spicy. So, and even though you use the knife, it's sufficient to just wash it out. The custom is most people do cut the edges, because the knife sometimes is not only sharp, but many times it's not sufficiently hot to absorb that much milk and become entirely asur. All you need to do is perhaps just remove the top layer. Rinse it well, of course, then it would be okay. So sometimes that's all that needs to be done, is to remove a kedei klipa. Yes.
Okay, in the case of fish, you don't see the scale, but it's labeled, it's packaged,
No.
and the label says it's
No, we don't trust Goyim. We don't use their testimony. You need to see the actual scales. You need to see that. So that's why, if you want to buy fish, you either buy it complete, or even if it's chopped up, as long as there's some scales on it, you can still see it. We don't rely on what they say to determine if something is kosher. Yeah. Yeah, as I mentioned before, the knife, even though it's cold, even though everything is cold, it does, because of its sharpness, it is able to penetrate a little bit. By the way, this is also true if the knife was not used on that day. Knife is in a class of its own. Even if the knife is not used on that day, we are mahmir, we're strict, to remove a little bit of the edge. The problem, of course, begins to become more complicated. The problem begins to be more complicated if the knife is a milk knife, and you're cutting a hot piece of meat. So now you're really in trouble, because you have a knife and you have a hot piece of meat. Then you of course, you may run into a lot of trouble with that piece of meat. Maybe the whole thing might not be good. You may have to throw away that piece. It's very, very hot. Or especially, if you have a piece of meat, you don't have a knife, but you have the other problem. You have ma'achalim harifim, tavlinim, very spicy meat that has already been cooked. It's not raw, very spicy, or it's cut up, and that falls into milk. Because it's very spicy or because it's cut up, it absorbs a lot more, even if it's not hot, according to some opinions. But if it's hot, the more so. But because it was spicy, because it was cooked, it wasn't raw meat, it is able to absorb a lot more. So I just wanted you to become familiar with these various concepts, because if you see something happening, you can understand what the problem may be. Spicy food can contribute in its own way, as we will see in the last item that I'm going to talk about. Or if it's in a piece of meat is spicy. Or a knife, by cutting vegetables or by cutting especially onions, things like that. So the combination of the two allows the flavor in the knife to go over. You can't just throw that onion in a dairy pot, in a dairy dish. That knife was used with meat.
You have salads, blue water, and other fish, flavorful fish. Now, if the shark get into a kosher fish and you caught the fish, would that make that fish funny? Would you have to just cut out that section?
I didn't understand. One more time?
Let's say you have a fish.
Okay.
And another fish bit into that fish.
All right, it bit the fish, yes.
Okay.
That's not a problem.
Shark.
No.
Can you take the fish?
You can still eat that fish.
Okay, just cut out the section that the shark bit into that fish.
Yeah, you don't even have to do that. There's no problem. There's no problem. Okay, let's finish with the last few examples of what happens in the various cases that you may encounter in your home. First of all, baking. Can you use an oven to bake both dairy and meat at the same time? Not advisable. The reason I'm saying not advisable, others might tell you asur, asur, asur. It's not exactly asur. Technically, if they both are covered, you could use it. You can make them at the same time. There should not be any problem. We don't do that today. Don't use your oven to bake dairy and meat at the same time, even if it's two are covered. According to some opinions, there's even a problem of using it in the same day, one after another. Let me finish this. You will find that there are various opinions on how to deal with it. Some don't do it in the same day. Now, if you always cover one or the other, or both, you never have a problem. You can almost, I said before, you technically can do it at the same time. But I just asked my mother, would it make a difference, if you cover something or not? Would you ever want to have something uncovered? She says, of course. If I wanted my chicken to be a little bit more browned or crispy, the last few minutes I removed the cover. See, I just learned something. Because I wanted to know, why don't you cover it all the time? Now, certain things you can't ever cover. Cake you don't want to cover, right? So depending, of course, on what you're cooking, what you're baking, you may not want to cover it. So, what do you do with an oven? The best way to go about it is as follows. If you need to bake or roast or something in the oven in the same day, if you need to do it, do this. Go ahead and bake or cook or roast whatever you're doing. If possible, cover it. Afterwards, make sure when you put it in your dairy that it's all clean, of course, that there's nothing left over there, but it's all clean. And before you put it into the oven, turn on the oven for 20 minutes. As it is, sometimes we preheat the oven. The preheating the oven is very, very helpful if you want to have one after the other. Because as I said before, we're concerned with the ze'ah, whatever is left over there will be burnt up anyway. So that's the way to do it. Just make sure it's clean. Of course, make sure that you're not putting it directly on the rack of the oven, but it's in its own platter, and that it's clean inside. But if you could wait for the next day, that's even better. What? To the temperature which you're always baking. But if you can turn it on to the highest, it's even better. But you don't need to.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, to whatever you're accustomed to baking. Okay, so that is the idea. The idea is, if everything is covered, it's even better. If you wait an extra day, perfect. And if you want to use it in the same day, just go ahead and turn it on the oven 20 minutes or so before. Microwave. In some ways it's simpler, but some opinions have similar concerns to a regular oven, and they put a glass of water in between the usage of the two, so that the steam should clean up the oven. You don't really have to do that. Some don't use it for both. Either it's dairy or it's meat. It's never used for both. If you want to use it for both, it's perfectly fine. As long as you make sure you clean the microwave very well. And that you cover the one that's usually lets out the most steam, that's the meat. So if you're going to be covering your food in the microwave, you should not have any problem whatsoever. And that's the best way to use a microwave. Cover at least the meat. Cover the one, at least the one that lets out the most steam. Okay? The flavor. Because that, affects the walls in the same way like the oven. Something is left over of the ze'ah. So if you cover at least the meat one, and it's only used for reheating food anyway, not for cooking, so it's not there that long. People need to know if they can use the microwave for both. No, not at the same time, one after another. We never use the oven or the microwave at the same time. We don't do that. Technically, it may not be a problem if they're both covered, but even one after the other is a problem. So if you cover the meat, or if you cover both, and you're only using it for reheating anyway, it shouldn't be a problem. It's not cooked for that long. You're on a plane. You want to have a cup of coffee. Can you have it in a mug that the plane gives you? When you're having a cup of coffee on the plane, try to ask for glass or for styrofoam. Okay? Not for China. And I'll talk a little bit maybe more about it next week, but this is just something to be aware of. All right. Milk that falls into a pot of meat, or milk that falls into meat, or a milk spoon that was used for meat. This will take us a little bit too long for today, and I don't want to hold you back. There are various possibilities of how it was done, and we'll leave that for next week, including the last point. Not right now. Yes. What is that? A toaster? Or a broiler. With a broiler is a more of an issue, because the broiler, as you know, the heat is from the top. And in some ways, that's good, because if the heat is coming from the top, it burns everything. There's nothing left over. It's very, very good. It's very, very hot. But if the heat is from the bottom, as it is with an oven, we're concerned that it does not fully burn any leftovers inside, and it may be an issue later if you put something that was not there before. In other words, you put meat and then you put milk. So with a broiler, it's less of a problem. However, we don't use a broiler for both either. It's not a good idea to use it for both, because it's a very small, it's not as big as an oven. The broilers are usually very small, and you could very easily have a broiler at the bottom. And you could easily, most people use the broiler only for meat, not for milk, because most of the time you boil it. So don't use a broiler for both. Okay? If something is completely covered and sealed, obviously it's less of a problem, but you may not remember that. That is why microwave ovens in the plane, since everything is sealed and double wrapped, you don't have those issues. And all they're doing is warming it up.
How often you put the bread and then all your meat on one and put the bread, and sometimes you warm up food.
Yeah?
Or sometimes you put your pizza down.
Yes.
So what would that happen?
Those toaster ovens, you can only use it for one, not for both. It's too small. And it can always easily get dirty, and it's very difficult to clean. And the temperature doesn't go up high enough anyway to have it self-clean and so forth.
So then you don't
use it only for milk, for dairy, or for one of the two.
But then you have to have if you put it to a dairy and then you want to meat with the bread, but also toasting the bread.
Toasting the bread? No, that's a problem. Remember, if you're having if that bread has absorbed any meat,
Like if you warm it,
right? You cannot use it. You cannot have it with milk. But if all you did was toast it in an oven, which happens to be a meat oven, but there was nothing absorbed, then you could have a piece of bread with milk too. And we're going to talk about that next week when I talk about nat bar nat, which I mentioned briefly last week, on how to handle a situation where you have something that was cooked, which is not milk or meat, in a pot of meat. Eating that with dairy. Can you do that? So Bezrat Hashem will talk a little bit more about that next week, since there are quite a few details about this and how to handle each of these situations.
How about a piece of fish now in the oven or in the broiler or the toaster oven? You're warming up fish sticks.
What about fish sticks?
You can put it in the meat or the dairy.
No, we mentioned the fact that fish we don't cook with meat with milk. You can eat it with milk if you're an Ashkenaz, but you don't cook it together with milk.
In the toaster oven.
Oh, in a toaster oven, it's fine. It's fine. Even though the toaster was used for milk, the dairy, you can prepare it in there. Yeah. No, I was just talking about mixing the two. We don't cook the two together, but if you're an Ashkenaz, you can eat the two. Okay. Yeah, you can cook it anywhere, in any oven. It's like something. It's part of it. And it's not really absorbing any flavor just by the fact that it's inside. But there are other issues. The what?
So it was, like same issue with the neck. There was fish, toasters, and food. What aspect of the, that sort of food,
right?
And also, maintain the kosher degrees.
No, but it's still hot enough. If it's going to be more than Yad Soletrical, or at least Yad Soletrical, it's going to be at least hot, it's at least 130 degrees, you're going to run into trouble. You're going to have a problem.
When you were telling her, you say that the kosher
Right? Right. What I was saying that is that it's not hot enough to clean. In other words, let's say you use it for meat, now you want to use it for milk.
Right.
It may not, depending on Tosar, it may not be hot enough to make it a share. For you to, I use it for this, now I want to use it for that. With a real oven, you can reach temperatures of 450, 550 degrees.
Right.
It's less of a problem.
See, with that fish, we was talking about.
Okay. What about?
The light was, I'm not sure.
The fish was a little hot?
No, it was cut. They were, I was just, it was levels of the temperature.
Yeah, if the food item is very hot, and you apply a knife that's not kosher, then you're basically ruining a piece of the fish or meat or whatever it is. If you take a goy's knife, which you know is taref, okay? Yeah, no, this is important. You go to a restaurant, and it's a vegetarian restaurant, okay? But he starts chopping the vegetables with a knife that he may have used for things that are not kosher. He brought from his home. So what if you're eating vegetables, foods? You have to know what is in his pots and pans. What knife is he using? Even though it's only cold, there's no heat involved. It's a knife, and especially if the food that you're cutting is hot. That's even bigger problem. So if he's cutting fish is hot. He's using a knife which is not kosher, then he's going to make the whole thing taref. You want to say what? What if it's what? If it's a cold fish, depending. Are you talking about the example of a restaurant? Yeah, but are we dealing with the restaurant or in your own home? See, in your own home there's less problem. You know, if it's cold fish and the knife happened to be not kosher knife, by mistake, somehow it happened, then you can just cut the edges of where the knife sliced because it's only cold. So that whatever is in the knife that was not kosher is not transferred too deeply, just superficially. But if you're in a restaurant, there are other concerns. People ask all the time, can I just go to a vegetarian restaurant? They have no meat, no seafood, nothing. Everything is kosher 100%. That may be true, but what about the pots and pans? Maybe they brought it from their home. Maybe, you don't know. What about the ingredients? What about the spices? What about the seasoning? There's so many problems in a vegetarian restaurant that you're unaware. People are unaware. They think it's, all I'm doing is eating salmon. I'm having salmon. If they don't have octopus in that restaurant, they don't have anything with just regular fish. What's wrong? Or vegetables and fruits. What's wrong with that? It may be good, but you have to investigate. You can't assume, because one who's not familiar with the kosher problems in the marketplace is unaware that there are many ingredients that are sometimes used that are not kosher. Okay, the fruits and vegetables might be okay. What utensils did he use? The utensils are perfectly fine. Well, did he use any seasoning, any ingredients? And let's say everything is 100%. Then you still have to deal with the issue of marit. What if somebody sees you eating that? What about that? Isn't that a problem? It can be, depending where you are. And now that's right. Then on top of all of that, depending on what he's cooking, maybe you can't have a boy cook your food for you. So you're asking, let me put it on the fire. With this, you can avoid. Yeah, but the Jew turned on the fire. The Sfaradi is very few put the fish on the fire, right?
So how can you ask the Jew that if you want to put it on?
Tell you want to have the honor of barbecuing your own fish.
Right.
But you can tell the girls
Yeah.
they could put it on.
Sparty don't have a glass of milk with their fish.
You can have a glass of milk after you ate fish.
Sure. You said Ashkenaz okay, but Sparty don't do that. What you said?
No, I said eating them together at the same time, like lox and cream cheese.
Right. That's not. Sparty won't have.
Some Sephardim will not have it, right? Right, lox and cream cheese is an example of eating it together. But if you have your fish, yeah, let's say you have your fish, okay? Now you want to have some cheesecake. Nothing wrong with that.
You cannot put the wine on top of that.
Right, not together.
A lot of people have lots of cream cheese on a bagel now. I don't have to. Only Ashkenaz do that.
Some Sephardim too. Yeah. What is that? Mixing, yeah. Some have that concern that I mentioned about the two not mixed ones.
Question number one. What happens if you cook meat and fish separately and 2 hours apart, and then just to warm the fish and the chicken at the same time later? Can you do that?
One more time? So it's warm and hot.
What happens if you cook fish and chicken?
Okay. Separate times.
And you took them out, now you want to just warm it, touch warm just for the dinner. The fish and the meat together. You warm it?
No, we don't warm fish and meat together in the same way.
Even if it's covered?
No, this covered is not a problem. Remember we
I'm
said
talking about it. It's covered with foil.
that is not a problem.
Alright. Question number, what happens if the kids mix the sponge, for when you do that? You throw the sponge or you throw
What do you mean they mix?
you mix the halabi sponge of washing dishes and the sarit sponge.
How do they mix? What do they do?
We can do the same sponge.
They use the wrong sponge, the wrong
They make some meat.
What?
They use some meat.
They wash the dishes with the wrong sponge.
They use the wash dishes with the wrong sponge.
Cut off the sponge.
It's hard to get out the flavor of the sponge.
Sponge doesn't really absorb any flavor. As long as the sponge was clean, you don't have any problems. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next week.
How do I take something out of the refrigerator that's cold and I want to eat it in a salad and I have a blend? Is there any way to do it?
Yeah, sure.
And I take it out of the refrigerator and leave it stay at room temperature?
As long as it's not in a pot, if it does not contain liquid, you can put it. Give me an example. What would you like to warm up? Piece of chicken? Okay. If it's a piece of chicken, you can put it by itself, not in a pot, on top of the blech at the point which is not sitting on top of the flame. So let's say the flame is over there, and the blech covers the entire range. Okay? You can put it on this side of the blech, where it will just become warm, but it will not become too hot to the touch. But you cannot put it directly over the flame, where the flame is.
The moment I take it out of the refrigerator.
As long as it has no liquid. What?
The moment it's in the refrigerator, I can take out a piece of chicken.
That's right.
Put it directly on the blech.
Yeah, as long as you don't put it in the pot, as long as it does not contain liquid, as long as you put it at the edge of the blech, not directly over the flame.
So the soup I couldn't warm up.
Yeah, I'll tell you what my wife does. We eat chopped liver sometimes, right? So chopped liver comes frozen. It's in the freezer. My wife wants to warm it up for Shabbat day. So what does she do? She takes it and puts it on top of the crock pot. You know what a crock pot is, right? On top of the crock pot, if you put it there 2-3 hours, it melts the liver and it makes it room temperature, perfectly ready to eat by the time I come home. So that you can do too. You can put it on top of another pot. You just can't put it directly over where the flame is, even if there's a blech there. It has to be at the edge. So it shouldn't be like you look like you're cooking.
So liquid I could not do it all to get it to warm temperature.
Unless it's going to only get to room temperature. So if you have something with a liquid, the best thing to do is to put it by the side of the blech, close to the flame. If you suspect that on the blech it might become very, very hot. So with liquid is more of a problem than it is with just plain dry sugar. Unless it's only going to warm up to room temperature. Some form. You can't make the fish and chicken warm it up at the same time. You don't want the flavors of them mixed. Yeah, fish and meat especially. No, you don't need to have the time, as long as you don't cook them or bake them together or eat them at the same time. It's very unhealthy. So if they're covered, like you said, suggested, no problem. Once you cover the two items or whatever you have, you basically don't have a problem, because what problem do you have in an oven? You have the problem with the ze'ah, with the vapor. There's flavor, especially if it's a small oven, it goes up and comes back down. So if you have milk, it's all mixing.
So if you cook the half-hour and you want to cook fish, you want to put it on the food?
Oh, in that case, no. The main problem was at the same time, because it's not asur. It was just mitameh briut, and at the same time, it will be more of a problem than one after another. We're not concerned with the flavor that's coming back down as a result of steam affecting as much as it is in basar v'challah, which is stricter. Some Sephardim eat fish with butter. For example, you follow your custom. In reality, there should be no concern. You can have your bagel with black, but some have the custom of refraining from doing, not just from milk. So you can hold yourself back.
It's part of this dairy fat. It's not really the
right. So that's why their custom was that was for sure okay. They didn't have that concern with them. Not only that, when we talk about Halav Israel, Halav Akum, the milk that was milked by non-Jew, where we have the concern of perhaps you put non-kosher milk, even if you're careful with Halav Israel, you don't have to worry about butter. You can buy any butter in the market now. Why? Because they can never make butter with milk that comes from non-kosher. It would not form. That's Halav Israel. So butter, you don't have to be concerned. You said it's different part of the milk.
Government inspection today is pretty clear that
Right, so we'll talk about that when we get to that. Yeah, next week we'll talk a little bit more about these examples, plus I think we're getting to Ta'aruvot. Ta'aruvot is a halachot that doesn't happen as often, Baruch Hashem, in the kosher kitchen, but in case something was bought that was tarif, not basar v'chalal, that got mixed up. We have to be a little familiar with the halachot of bitul that relates to them. As I said, I'll give you an example with hata. There's no flavor, all it is pieces. What do you do now? יש לך בלב על האש, יש לך קוב מים, מה הבעיה? Okay. This question was, this is for Shabbat. You have a bleh with a flame, and you have a tea kettle on Shabbat that you use to make yourself coffee or tea. What's the proper way? Tea kettle. The bleh is a piece of metal that covers the fire. Shabbat. And there's a reason why we use that, in case you want to use the flames, why it should be cut. It doesn't have to be. There's some advantage. So the proper way, maybe not. Okay, say it over. As long as you don't put down the tea kettle on the table, you can always put it back. Once you put it on the table, it becomes a problem. ואולי לא תוכל להחזיק. נכון, זה גם בסדר, יש כאלה שעושים. לא משנה, אבל אתה החזקת. ואכלת להחזיק את זה, זה מדי כבד. מזבת, או שלא חשבת על זה. יש כאלה שאפילו מתאים, בתנאי שהתכוונת להחזיר מיד. אז תלוי בנסיבות, אבל לכתחילה, אם אפשר, צריך לדאוג לך שאתה לא מוריד אותו. לא מוריד אותו. In the yeshivot, what would they do? בישיבות, הסיר הוא גדול מאוד. The pot is very very big. אז שני בחורים היו צריכים לריב. Yeah, two boys would come and pick it up. You couldn't do it by yourself. No, I can't להוריד.
זה לא אש חיה. יש...
פלטה חשמלית. פלטה חשמלית זה כמו בלק. לא צריך, זה פלטה. Plata is a plate, an electric plate. That acts like a blech itself. It's a כמו blech. זה משהו אחר, זה לא פלט. לא פלט, אתה מתכוון קיריים, אבל חשמליים. לא, it's talking about an electric stove. אז זה אש, זה כמו, צריך גם כן. זה כמו אש, צריך בלך. עכשיו במקרה שלא היה לך בלך, אתה עדיין יכול להשתמש באש בשבת. אנשים שוכחים מזה, people forget. Yeah, people forget to think, this is הלכות שבת, מה ששאלת אני אגיד את זה כבר. Some people think that in case you have a flame without any oil, you can't use a flame. It's not true. If the food was fully cooked for Shabbat, זה הכל מאוחד. והאש דולק, and you're leaving it on a small flame, you can leave it a whole Shabbat like that, שום דבר לא יקרה. אבל ברגע שהורדת את זה, אתה לא יכול להחזיר את זה. על אש חיה. The moment you remove it from the flame, you cannot put it back. Even if it's fully cooked. אבל להשאיר את זה ככה עד מחר בבוקר, שישאר את זה אין בעיה. בתנאי שזה יתפשט כבר. Or it was completely wrong. זו אחת המעלות של הגלך, שזה מרשה לך להחזיר. That's one of the advantages of a blech, that it allows you to put something back as long as you didn't put it back. זו מעלה אחת. ישנם עוד מעלה של הבלך. עוד מעלה זה שאם האוכל לא היה מוכן, אתה יכול להשאיר אותו על הבלך. ועוד מעלה, יש עוד מעלה שאתה יכול להזיז בחוקו, הצידה קצת, בגלל שזה מדי אחד, אחרי זה להחזיר אותו. כן, עכשיו זה with half and half. What do you mean half and half? Okay, I don't understand. What do you mean, how do you pour?
I'm saying I have hot water and I want to pour hot water into a cup, so I make sure my cup is dry.
Right.
That's shaking, then I go to solution.
Why would you want to do that?
I want to.
What do you have, coffee or tea?
Tea.
Oh, tea. What kind of tea? Are you using Nest tea or are you using the leaves?
Tea bags.
Oh, tea bags. Okay, so we'll get to that. Are you going to be around in a couple of weeks here? For now?
But I'm not going to do the picture.
Okay, that's fine. Tea bags are problematic on Shabbat, right? Because tea bags are one of those items that I mentioned earlier that can easily cook even in a kli sheni, perhaps, using tea, because it's very, very light, cooks easily. So people are careful not to use tea bags in a kli sheni, but if you put it into a kli shlishi, it's perfectly okay. I avoid the whole problem, and I just use powder tea. Coffee is not a problem unless it's Turkish coffee. You cannot make Turkish coffee in Shabbat.
So green
because you're cooking the coffee.
Green tea in bulk would be in bulk, not in the tea.
Or the essence. You know, these are a lot of people prepare the essence. You know what the essence is? They take 10 tea bags, they pour hot water, and they have prepared the concentrated essence. Then they pour that into every cup that they make. That's what they do in Israel. I don't know why in Israel they've never heard of this tea, the powder tea. Oh, what's the point? Why do you have to do this? Just put some powder. I never saw powder tea. Only powder. I don't know. They don't know about these things. No, you can't make Turkish coffee in Shabbat because you. Yeah, kli shlishi perhaps, yes, because it's not a problem. Same as tea, sure. Yeah, but we're concerned that there are certain things. Everybody holds kli sheni. We all hold kli sheni of Hashem. But because there are certain items that are called kalei habishul, they easily cook. Even kli sheni, perhaps, maybe. So we are careful. So all it takes is put it into kli sheni and then transferring it over to another cup. That's all, just to be on the safe side. So if you want to have Dr. Turkish coffee and it will still taste as good in a kli shlishi, then go ahead. Kli shlishi is not a problem according to anyone.
So I can take a teapot, put in my tea, put in cold water, let it sit there for a long period of time. And that will be concentrated, have a lot of tea, and then have water, and then add the solution, and then add some of this tea in.
You don't even need to do kli shlishi for that. The essence you can even add to a kli sheni. The whole idea of kli shlishi is if you have tea bags, you insist on having a tea bag. The only way you can do it, according to most opinions, is a kli shlishi.
I would have to add the tea to the hot water, because I'd be boiling.
What you should not do, by the way, that's a good point you raised, if you're going to be adding the essence into the hot water, don't put the essence first and then pour the hot boiling water into it. Right? Put the essence afterwards. Okay? בגלל שהתמצית יקרה, אל תכניס את התמצית קודם, לשפוך קודם את המים הרותחים, אחרי זה תוסיף את התמצית. נכון. תנור אתה מתכוון? למה אתה אומר? תנור. בעברית זה תנור. מה הבעיה? נכון. אתה לא יכול להחזיר לתוך תנור. In an oven you cannot put something back into an oven. If you left, let's say you left something to warm or to cook in an oven before Shabbat, you come home, sure you want to have it, go ahead, open the oven, and then you can't put it back inside. However, when you do open the oven, you have to be concerned with something else. If that oven has a red light that goes on when the heat is on, then you only want to open it when it's on, not when it's off. Yeah. Because when the light is on, because if the light is off, by opening the door, you might be causing it. If you did, it's okay. If it happened, it happened. But lechatchila, you should wait until the light is on. No. You cannot put something back into an oven because of money. It looks like you're cooking or baking from scratch. It's just like you wouldn't have a black on the fire. לא משנה. נגמר. רק, the only time you can put back in an oven is if all you have in the oven is a pilot, like pilot. הנורה הזאת, קטנה. אם היא דלוקה, זאת אומרת, התנור לא דלוק, the oven is not on, but the pilot is on. And all you want to do is maintain a little bit the warmth, קצת לשמור על החום, בתוך המסגרת הזאת, שקוראים לזה תנור. זה מותר לך. אבל אם התנור עובד, אי אפשר להזיז. The oven is on, you cannot put that. לא חשוב, 200 או 300. לא מחזירים לתוך תנור. לא מחזירים. בשום פנים לא. אז לא הוצאת אותו. חצי זה משהו אחר, זה בסדר. לא הוצאת, זה בסדר. כן.
You say they're adding sugar. We put the sugar in the empty and the lemon juice for making tea. You don't have to add it after just.
So you don't have to. That doesn't make a difference.
Sugar doesn't.
The sugar won't cook. But it's better. I agree with you. It's definitely better. Yeah, no, let me just show you. It's always better to put it because you already have a clean shani. If you put it in the bottom, what you're having is a hot boiling stream of water, coming down. That again is very powerful, more powerful than the clean shani. And they can be cooking a little bit. Yeah, because it's a liquid. It's cold. ישתמשו בה, כן. לא צריך יותר. לכאורה, once the tea bag has been used once, I believe that's it. It's been cooked. You should be able to use it. I haven't heard. Yeah, I don't believe it should be a problem. לא מאמין שיש בזה משהו. אבל יש כאלה, maybe some opinions would hold, perhaps it wasn't cooked enough the first time. No, what I'm saying is, according to those who hold a cliche, is a problem with the tea bag, right? So let's say you before Shabbat, במקרה שכאן מי אמר את זה? אתה הזכרת את זה? Yeah, בשביל שהיה לפני שבת, you use it before Shabbat to make a regular cup of tea. Before Shabbat. So so now you have a used tea bag. You want to know if you can use the used tea bag that you made before Shabbat in a real clean Yishon Afilu, or Klishani, if you can use it without the Klishnishi. Could be, because it was already cooked once in a Klishani. ככה נראה לי. לפעמים ככה לדעתי. לא, אבל בשבת זה לא בעיה, בגלל שבשבת אתה לא תוכל לעשות את זה רק בכלי שלישי. אז בכלי שלישי לא, אבל לא תוכל להכניס אותו לכלי שני. את המשומש. כלי שלישי. אם השתמשת בו לפני שבת בכלי שני, אז הוא כבר יתבשל. אז עכשיו, בשבת אתה לא חייב להעביר אותו לכלי שלישי לכאורה. בגלל שזה כבר השתמשת בו בכלי שני. פעם אחת.
אז רק בכלי ראשון זה עובד. משומש בשבת, עשיתי אותו בשבת. אפשר לעשות עם בחוץ.
אז אתה יכול להשתמש בו שוב באותו דרך. כלי שלישי? לא, כלי שלישי? כן. לא, זה לא מבושל, בגלל שכלי שלישי בכלל לא מבשל. הוא לא מבשל, יכול להיות שהוא בסך הכל... His example, he put a tea bag in a kli shlishi. The kli shlishi, even though it may have been able to color the water, it's very possible, since it's only a kli shlishi, that it did not cook the contents, the leaves in the bag. So even though it's used now, you cannot the second time around put it into a kli sheni, because maybe now you will be cooking it better. בפעם הראשונה בסך הכל מה שהצלחת לעשות זה להוציא, לצבוע את המים. זה כן, מים מסוגלים לזה. אבל יתכן שזה לא מבושל לו. You can use it on a kli shlishi. Yeah.
כל העניין פה שלא לבשל את הנייר,
את העלים, לא את הנייר.
את העלים עם הנייר.
לא, הנייר אין בעיה, זה לא מבשל נייר.
אז את העלים, אני לא מבשל. כל העניין לא מבשל.
אותו דבר עם נענה. Anybody here knows what na'na is? Of course, you know. Na'na. You know those leaves for tea? Very good. Mint. In English it's mint. You can't put it in Shabbat. Into your kli shlishi, yes.
not keli sheni.
איזה היבש והחי?
Just be careful with na'ana that you wash it well, you check for bugs. A lot of them they have bugs.
איזה אתה מדבר? על החי או על היבש? יש טרי ששמים אותו במגבת, שישאר במים במגבת.
אבל זה לא מבושל, מה זה משנה?
נענה מיובש.
יש נענה מיובש?
כמו קש. יש נענה שהוא טרי, שמים במגבת במים ונשאר כמו חי.
לא משנה, אם זה מיובש ולעולם לא בישלו אותו, אז ייתכן שאתה מבשל אותו עכשיו. כלי שלישי.
מה עם החי?
אותו דבר, כלי שלישי. אנחנו חוששים שבכלי שני זה עלול להתבשל. כלי שני has some power. Maybe nothing will happen. But we don't take a chance. We're more careful.
אני חושב שכלי שלישי גם מבשל.
לא, כלי שלישי כולם אומרים שלא כוח. זה לא מבושל. זה אולי זה קצת...
מה זה נקרא לא מבושל? מה זה נקרא מבושל? אתה לוקח אותו, זה עומד כמו עץ חי. אתה שם אותו במים השלישי, אתה מרים אותו ומופך למטה.
He says, by putting the leaves in the kli shlishi, how do you know it's not cooked? He says it's wrinkled. Even though it's wrinkled, זה ככה, מתחיל ככה להתפורר. זה נופל, it falls, it's not called cooked. Give you an example. It's hard to tell. If you take a vegetable, you can more easily tell if it was cooked or not. Vegetable, אתה יכול לבדוק. זה טעים או לא טעים. It's cooked enough or not cooked enough. With leaves, you don't eat the leaves. So it's very hard to know if it's cooked or not. So how do you know? So you have to rely on what the חכמים אמרו. שכלי שלישי אין לו את הכוח לבשל. What does it mean to cook? To fully cook something means to fully extract everything that it has, and to allow the water to fully penetrate it, and to, I guess, completely soften it. So, yeah. So the kli shlishi, אין לו את הכוח הזה,